The latest news, updates, and more from the world of health and medicine. This is Medical Minutes with Wish TV's medical reporter, Dr. Mary Gillis.
From Wish TV, I'm medical reporter Dr. Mary Gillis, and this is Medical Minutes on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Deciding whether to get your child the COVID vaccine can be a difficult one, especially if separated parents disagree. One parent says yes to the shot, the other parent, it's a hard no, and neither party is willing to cave. So what do couples who are no longer together do when facing this challenge? I spoke with Dr. Heather Fretwell, psychiatrist at Eskenazi Health, who says it is possible to find common ground, but it'll take some work. Our conversation is next. Dr. Heather Fretwell, it is so good to see you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Dr. Gillis, what a delight to talk to you again.
Well, okay, so we're talking about a topic that is very sort of divisive. We're talking about divorced parents specifically, and there's a conflict or a divide between whether they want to get their child or children vaccinated. One is a yes, one is a no. This seems like a very complicated issue. So I was hoping to get from you are some tips how parents, divorced parents, can work together to come to a decision in a respectful manner. So what would you say to someone, to a couple who is no longer together, but is going through this exact situation?
And I can imagine that there's a lot of folks in this situation. So I think this is one very kind of pressing, urgent example of many things that folks who are divorced may not agree, on as they're co-parenting and raising their child, maybe in, joint custody arrangements or visitations or all these kinds of different things. I once read that two married people disagree on a full third of all available topics. Right?
Wow.
So disagreements and conflict in relationships is incredibly common, incredibly normal. And it's all about how do we navigate that?
And then
right?
You toss in your child's health. I mean, your children are the most important people on the planet, right? So it exponentially complicates things. But wow, one third of all things, that's incredible.
Right. And it could be as trivial as one person passionately loves football and another person will just never really enjoy it, but they figure out how to tolerate somebody's excitement for it, right? Even if they don't find it, and different kind of philosophies, maybe some different religious points, some different political points, some different, outlooks on, how do we rank our priorities? People have a lot of differences about these things, right?
Tough, right? And I mean, I think divorce might even be tougher. I don't know. So, but anyway, please go ahead.
Not, so living with each other and kind of having to continually have these discussions, there might be, a lot of different reasons why the discussions might be more limited. But the biggest thing I would say is that just.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to go back. You said couples that are no longer living together, or maybe are in the same household but are no longer together. Okay, right. So, all right, let's go with that. I'm sorry.
So the biggest thing I would say is, in general throughout all of this is that the more in harmony you can be on how to raise your child and how to support your child, the better it is for the child. Kind of period. That's a very broad statement. And it's hard work. In my personal life, in my professional life, I watch a lot of parents do this with a prior partner with whom they share custody agreements of some sort with their very, very precious children. And as you were saying, the more you escalate the concern, about health, preventative health, and then you toss in the unfortunate degree of the political pressures and the unfortunate degree to which this has become a kind of like a radicalized topic from either side in some cases. And you have something that even a pair of people who normally get along pretty well as they're co-parenting may be having a major disagreement about. So my best advice is to think about, again, is your framework? What are kind of like your rules for engagement? If you and your partner can have a rule for, if we start yelling, we need to stop and regroup. That is a great rule. It's easy to say, very hard to do. I don't pretend otherwise, but that can be really helpful to keep salvaged, the discussion and the line of communication open. When it comes to something like this, there's a lot of different kinds of information people look at and a lot of different kind of fears people look at. There's a lot of folks that may have kind of vague ideas about how does a vaccine work and what's the risk of a vaccine versus the risk of a disease. Have a lot of thoughts about that. And so these can be very, very passionate discussions. The big thing is, I think what people want most is for their child to be safe and to be healthy. And so the question, right, is, do vaccines help this, or do vaccines put their child more at risk?
I love that you just said that, Dr. Fretwell, because that is the number one priority coming from both sides. They both can at least agree on that. They want the number one thing is to protect their child. Anyway, please.
Absolutely. And so what I can say as a physician, and I'm an interesting psychiatrist because I actually majored in microbiology at Ball State University. Okay, that was my undergraduate major. Had wonderful immunology professors in undergrad, in medical school, very interested in all of this. And I have a deep respect for the work of my colleagues in infectious disease. And over and again, if you look at what physicians are doing for their children, we are getting our children vaccinated. We have looked at the evidence. We are putting not just our money, but our hearts and the most precious relationships in our lives, right? When we look at the risks, we find that the vaccine has such a much lower risk than the rolling the dice of COVID. Even Omicron, which is a somewhat milder disease, it still puts children in hospital. It still kills them. And while vaccines of any kind will never be zero risk, the risk is so much smaller. So every single one of my colleagues, unless there's a very special medical circumstance, and we know who those are, right? A child with an immunological condition or a child with cancer, the folks that typically can't get vaccines and so depend even more on the herd immunity concept and process.
I feel like I just want to go back and say that's so, interesting that you had the sort of infectious disease, sort of immunology in your studies. So I feel like I'm getting like a 2-for-1 deal. So anyway, but so understanding it from both perspectives, like this is wonderful. So please continue. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to make certain that was very interesting.
Absolutely. When you come right down to the risk of the vaccine, there's a very tiny, present but very tiny risk, especially for boys and teenage boys, to have a problem with their heart within a month or two of the vaccine. In the cases that we've looked at, almost all of them have completely recovered. Then you look at the hundreds and thousands of cases of children contracting and suffering with COVID, and you see many more tragic outcomes. So it's just very, very clear to me. And so I have an 11-year-old daughter, and she, bless her heart, got into my medical textbooks from a very young age. I remember coming home, and she was 5 years old, and she had like 5 anatomy textbooks open up to the brain.
Oh my gosh.
All of this. So at 11 years old, we talked to her about the pros and cons.
Like mother, like daughter, like mother. Like
my mother was a math teacher. My father was a chemistry teacher. There's a lot of science in our line.
You got that gene. That's very cool. Anyway, for a kid to be 5 and looking into that stuff, that's incredible.
It was great. And so at 11 years old, and she talks to her friends, the other kids at school, and she's had to be pulled out of school for quarantine purposes, and she's seen her friends have to do that, and she's missed them. She's one of the kids that, she's fine with wearing masks, and she does that pretty routinely, especially on the bus where it's required. And when we talked about it, her major thing was, but I'll be 12 next year, and that would mean that I could get the adult version of the vaccine. And so when we talked about, but it's very active right now. And so she, as most kids do, she does not like being poked with needles, but we actually sat down and talked about it. And so some of the pros and cons and some of the risks and benefits, and, no, she did not have the ultimate decision because you shouldn't at 11, but I wanted to have the opportunity to try to get her buy-in. And fortunately, in her case, we were able to do that. And so she very bravely went. And I tell you, the techs that administer the vaccines these days, they've done so many thousands of them. It was the fastest vaccine I've ever seen in my life. First dose, yeah, in and out. And she was like, what just happened? And I said, you got your vaccine. She's like, that barely hurt. So, it's a good time.
Well, I love that you actually sat down and spoke with your daughter. Of course, the parent has the ultimate decision, to have that conversation and put her at ease and explain. I feel like she might know science just a little tad more than some other children. But anyway, I'm thinking about the tips that you, while we're talking about this. So I'm thinking that being able to, in terms of parents who are separated, this will take a number of conversations. This isn't just going to be a one-off.
Typically not. And it may be a set of positions where neither parent feels like they can budge. And so eventually one set of conversations or ideas or discussion points might engage and win over the other parent in either direction in this debate. I hope in the direction to vaccinate. I will admit that's a biased opinion based on my medical knowledge and my personal choices.
And then I'm also thinking, together, parents go to their pediatrician, get the facts. Because you know what, I understand that what is it, 0.001% that a child will get that heart inflammation, but you never want your kid to be that one. You never know. So I understand where they're coming from, but then again, let's have a conversation with the pediatrician. Let's hear what they have to say. But I'm thinking that the tone and the language with the conversation is very important. So can you speak to that? The language between two people who disagree in general on many things, that you said a third of things, and now that they are divorced and or not together anymore, the language, the respect that needs to be there.
Yes, and so kind of what we were talking about earlier, continuously acknowledge in your partner, whichever stance you have, that your common goal is for your child to be as safe and healthy as possible. Believe that of each other. Use that to give yourself some patience. Maybe as you were discussing, say, okay, let's go talk to the pediatrician, right? And let's let them talk to us about the pros and cons of this. And kind of have that additional piece of information given to us, what they're seeing. And let's look at, because I know there's been some articles about, the kinds of cases Riley's been seeing in town about, some of the very sad cases. I remember very early on in the pandemic, I heard a story about a little girl, 4-year-old at Community North that died of COVID. So children continue to die from the illness. Every vaccine has its pros and cons. An example might be chickenpox vaccine. There's
right, exactly.
There's reactions to that.
It's not novel to the coronavirus vaccine. We have to remember there's with every vaccine that's been put out that we've gotten shots when we were young, and we continue to get those, tetanus shots or whatever. It has its pros and cons, a flu shot. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt, but yes, you're right. Let's remember that pros and cons here. And I just want to go back to you're not going to convince somebody by sort of the arguing, you're not going to change someone's mind. So I like to think about Aristotle, or maybe there's questions of whether this is Aristotle, so I got to figure this out. It is the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without accepting it.
I would believe that could be Aristotle. That sounds really good. And so as you're debating ideas or entertaining ideas, be critical of the ideas, not your partner.
I love that. That's great. That is such wise words. Well, Dr. Fretwell, it was so nice to talk to you. Thank you so much. Again, such wise knowledge, and always great to see you. And I look forward to talking to you again.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
This has been Medical Minutes from Wish TV. I'm medical reporter Dr. Mary Gillis. Be sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast and check out new updates every week. You can also learn more at wishtv.com and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook.
Learn more and get more with Wish TV. Online at wishtv.com and when you follow Wish TV on Facebook. Be sure to check out more great podcasts from the All Indiana Podcast Network now at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.